It's math. Efficiency beats excuses. She missed velocity targets, so I cut the drag. Are we done, or do you want to audit my bonus too?
Do you think workplace efficiency matters more than a human heartbeat? Or that quarterly profits can justify cutting off the lifeline of a mother weeks away from giving birth? My courtroom was colder than usual that morning, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the man walking in. He moved as if he owned the very tiles beneath his feet. I can still hear the rhythmic, irritating click of his polished Italian leather shoes on the old wood floor, a sound that declared his time was far more expensive than anyone else's justice. If you believe human dignity shouldn't be just a line item on a spreadsheet, stay with me and subscribe, because today, I'm going to tell you exactly how a CEO thought he could fire an 8-month pregnant woman for moving too slow, and how I taught him a lesson about speed he will never forget. I called the next matter. The defendant was Marcus Sterling, CEO of a tech startup currently making waves in the market. The plaintiff was Sarah Miller, a former administrative assistant. As they stood up, the collision of two very different worlds was so violent I had to pause a beat before lifting my gavel. Marcus, roughly 40, wore a bespoke navy suit, his crisp white cuffs revealing a rose gold watch that I suspect could feed a family for 3 years. He didn't look at me. He was too busy scrolling through his phone, brow furrowed as if his presence here was a personal insult to his busy schedule. Across the aisle was Sarah, 28 years old, but the dark circles under her eyes added a decade to her face. She was 8 months pregnant, her belly straining against the buttons of a worn-out coat. She stood with difficulty, one hand bracing her lower back, the other clutching a cheap plastic folder. Her shoes were flat, soft-soled, and worn down, the kind of shoes you wear when you have to walk because you can't afford a car. I saw her hand tremble slightly as she placed the file on the table, not from the cold, but from the terror of facing the man who had wrecked her life. I looked at Marcus and asked, "Mr. Sterling, do you know why you are here today?" He sighed, a heavy, theatrical exhale, before finally sliding his phone into his inner pocket. He looked up, a half-smile playing on his lips, the look of a man used to giving orders and having them obeyed. "Your Honor, this is a waste of my time and yours," Marcus said, his voice smooth but icy. "She was let go for missing productivity targets. It's a business decision. I don't understand why the court is micromanaging our internal HR processes." "HR processes," I repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air. The file before me states she was terminated on November 14th, just 2 weeks before her due date. The reason listed on the termination notice is lack of necessary agility and burdening team velocity. "You call that business?" Marcus shrugged, adjusting his silk tie. "Your Honor, we are a fast-paced company. We race against the clock. Miss Miller, well, she moves like a turtle. She takes 5 bathroom breaks a day. She needs breaks for snacks. In my world, time is money. And she was burning my cash." I looked over at Sarah. Her head was bowed, tears beginning to drop onto the plastic folder. Marcus's words weren't just a defense. They were knives. He didn't see a mother carrying life. He saw a broken cog that needed to be discarded. I felt my chest tighten. In my courtroom, I have met many cruel people, but cruelty wrapped in the guise of business efficiency has always disgusted me the most. "Miss Miller," I said, keeping my voice soft but firm, "tell me about that day, the day he called you into his office." Sarah took a deep breath, fighting back a sob. "Your Honor," she began, her voice shaking. "I worked there for 4 years. I was never late. I always finished my work. But as the baby grew, my back hurt. The doctor said I couldn't sit in one place too long, that I needed to walk to keep the blood flowing. That day, Mr. Sterling called me in. He didn't look at my face. He looked at a stopwatch on his desk and said, 'Sarah, it took you 4 minutes to retrieve documents from the printer. My standard is 45 seconds. The entire courtroom went dead silent. Marcus rolled his eyes, looking bored, like he was listening to a whining child. But I was watching. I was cataloging every detail, because Marcus Sterling thought he had walked in here to clean up a little mess using lawyers and money. He had no idea he had just stepped into a place where his Rolex held absolutely no power. A stopwatch. In 20 years on the bench, I have heard every excuse for bad management. I have heard of strict quotas, aggressive deadlines, and high-pressure environments, but timing a pregnant woman's walk to the printer as if she were a racehorse running a losing lap, that wasn't management. That was hunting. I looked at Marcus Sterling. He didn't look ashamed. In fact, he looked annoyed that Sarah had brought it up, as if her mentioning his cruelty was a breach of corporate etiquette. Mr. Sterling, I said, leaning forward just an inch. That inch usually signals to a smart defendant that the ice is cracking. Did you actually time her bathroom breaks? Is that a metric your company officially tracks? Marcus straightened his cuffs, looking me dead in the eye. Your Honor, we operate on micro efficiencies. We track everything. Keystrokes, screen time, idle time. Data doesn't have feelings. Data tells the truth. And the data showed that in her third trimester, Miss Miller's idle time increased by 18%. Her transit time between desks doubled. In my company, 18% is the difference between a market leader and a bankruptcy filing. He said it with such conviction, such icy belief in the divinity of numbers. I looked down at Sarah. She wasn't looking at him. She was holding her stomach, as if trying to shield the baby from the coldness of the man sitting 6 feet away. So, I continued, keeping my voice dangerously level. Because she moved slower due to a medical condition pregnancy, you decided she was a liability? It's not a condition, Your Honor. It's a choice, Marcus shot back, and a gasp rippled through the gallery. He ignored it. She chose to get pregnant. She chose to keep the baby. She knew the demands of the job. When her performance dipped, it affected the team's velocity. We missed our sprint goals for October. Do you know what that cost us? I waited. I wanted him to say it. I wanted the room to hear exactly what he valued more than the health of a mother and child. It cost the department a 4% drop in output, Marcus said, his voice rising with indignation. And because of that 4% drop, we missed the quarterly target, which means I missed my performance tier. That lag, Your Honor, cost me my quarterly bonus. There it was, the truth, stripped of all the corporate buzzwords. He didn't fire her because the company was collapsing. He didn't fire her because she was incompetent. He fired her because her swollen ankles and aching back threatened the check he used to buy his Italian shoes. I let the silence stretch. I let it become heavy. I wanted Marcus to sit in the echo of his own greed. Let me understand this clearly, I said, picking up the termination letter from the evidence pile. You are telling this court that you fired a woman 2 weeks before her due date, cutting off her health care and her income because her pregnancy speed bumped your personal bonus. Marcus scoffed, shaking his head as if I were the one being unreasonable. It's not just my bonus, Judge. It's the principle of accountability. If I pay for 8 hours of work, I expect 8 hours of peak performance. I don't pay for waddling. I don't pay for heavy breathing. I pay for results. If she couldn't handle the pace, she should have quit. She stayed, she slowed us down, and I cut the dead weight. That is my right as a CEO. Dead weight, I repeated. Sarah made a small sound, a whimper that she tried to catch in her throat. She looked up at me, her eyes red and pleading. Judge, she whispered, I needed that insurance. The delivery is next week. I don't have the money for the hospital. He knew that. I told him that when he handed me the box to pack my things. I looked back at Marcus. Did she tell you that, Mr. Sterling? Did she tell you she needed the insurance for the birth? Marcus checked his watch. She might have said something emotional. I don't recall. I have a policy not to let personal sob stories dictate business strategy. If she can't afford a baby, maybe she should have managed her personal finances better. That was the moment. That was the moment the temperature in my veins dropped to absolute zero, because there is a line between being a tough boss and being a monster. And Marcus Sterling had just sprinted across it with a stopwatch in his hand. He thought he was explaining economics. He didn't realize he was confessing to a moral crime. I closed the file folder. The sound was soft, but in that quiet room, it sounded like a pistol hammer clicking back. There is a misconception among men like Marcus Sterling. They believe that the phrase at-will employment is a magical shield, a legal force field that allows them to fire anyone for any reason without consequence. They mistake the law for permission to be a tyrant. I watched Marcus lean back in his chair, checking his cuticles. He looked bored. He looked like a man waiting for a servant to clear a table, not a defendant facing a judgment that could dismantle his arrogance. Mr. Sterling, I said, breaking the silence I had let settle over the room. You seem very confident in your legal standing. You admitted to firing a protected class of employee, a pregnant woman, based on physical limitations directly related to her pregnancy. Do you have a legal department, or do you just make these decisions between golf swings? Marcus smirked. It was a small, tight movement of his lips, dismissive and sharp. I have the best lawyers in the city, Your Honor, and they assured me that performance is a valid ground for termination. We documented it. We have the data. Slowness is a performance issue. The law doesn't force me to keep a slow employee just because she's pregnant. That would be reverse discrimination against my fast employees. He said it with such smug satisfaction, using legal terms he clearly didn't understand. He thought he was debating a college professor. He forgot he was talking to a judge who knows that federal law does not care about his sprint goals. Documentation, I said, picking up the stack of papers he had submitted. Let's look at this documentation. You claim you have a rigorous process. Show me the warnings. Show me the performance improvement plan. Show me where you sat Miss Miller down and discussed reasonable accommodations for her condition. Marcus waved a hand dismissively. We don't do performance improvement plans. Those are for dinosaurs. In a startup, you either hack it or you don't. I gave her verbal feedback. I told her to pick up the pace. You told a woman carrying an 8-pound baby to pick up the pace? I asked, my voice dry. Yes, Marcus replied. I told her to walk faster. I told her to limit the bathroom breaks. She didn't. That is insubordination. I looked at Sarah. She was trembling. Sarah, I asked gently, did he offer you a chair? Did he offer you a closer printer? Did he offer you any accommodation at all? Sarah shook her head, wiping her eyes with a tissue that was already shredding in her grip. No, Judge. He actually moved my desk further away from the restroom 2 weeks ago, he said. He said the sight of me waddling back and forth was distracting to the developers. He put me in the back corner, near the server room. It was hotter there. My ankles swelled up so bad I couldn't wear shoes by the end of the day. The gallery murmured. A low sound of disgust rippled through the room. Even the court officer, a man who has seen everything, shifted his stance and glared at Marcus. I turned back to the CEO. You moved a pregnant woman to a hotter room, further from the facilities she needed, because she was distracting. And then you fired her for being slow when the walk took longer? Marcus sighed, clearly annoyed that we were dwelling on the details. It was an office optimization. We needed the front space for client meetings. Look, Judge, this is all just noise. The bottom line is she didn't meet the KPIs. The contract says I can terminate for failure to meet KPIs. End of story. The bottom line, I repeated. You like that phrase. Let's talk about your bottom line. You mentioned earlier that her slowness cost you your bonus. Marcus straightened up. For the first time, he looked animated. The mention of money woke him up. Exactly. It was a $50,000 quarterly performance bonus. 50 grand. Poof. Gone. Because she couldn't walk fast enough to get the Q4 reports filed on time. Do you know what I had planned for that money? I had a deposit on a vacation home. Now I have to wait another quarter. She stole that from me. She stole it from you, I said slowly, making sure the court reporter caught every syllable. So, in your mind, the $50,000 is the victim here? It's not just the money, Marcus said, tapping the table. It's the meritocracy. I earned that. She dragged me down. I leaned forward. I placed my elbows on the bench and clasped my hands. Mr. Sterling, you have made a grave error in my courtroom. You have confused your greed with your rights. You think because you are the CEO, you are the protagonist of this story. But you are about to learn that, in the eyes of the law, a bonus built on the back of a violated worker is not an asset. It is evidence. I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Just a flicker. He didn't know where I was going, but he sensed, perhaps for the first time, that his expensive suit wasn't armor. One last question before I rule on the evidence, I said. This $50,000 bonus, is that net or gross? And is that fund still in the company accounts, or was it redistributed? Marcus narrowed his eyes. The board withheld it. It sits in the retained earnings pool until I hit the next target. Why? Just curiosity. I lied. It wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. I was doing the math. $50,000. Sarah's medical bills, the pain and suffering, the lost wages. The numbers were starting to align in a way that Marcus Sterling was not going to like. I shifted my gaze from the arrogant man in the navy suit to the woman trying to make herself small in the plaintiff's chair. Money is abstract until you see what the lack of it does to a person in crisis. Miss Miller, I asked. Mr. Sterling mentioned his lost bonus. He mentioned his delayed vacation home. Tell me what you lost the day he fired you. Sarah didn't look up immediately. Her hands were gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. I lost my breath, Judge. Literally. When I walked out of the building with my box, I had a panic attack in the parking lot. I couldn't breathe. I felt sharp pains. I thought I was going into labor right there on the asphalt. The room was quiet. I could hear the hum of the overhead lights. I drove myself to the emergency room, she continued, her voice cracking. I was terrified, not just for the baby, but because I knew the coverage usually ends at midnight on the day of termination. I was checking my watch between contractions, praying the doctors would see me before the clock struck 12. I looked at Marcus. He was checking a notification on his watch. He wasn't listening. He was waiting for his turn to speak. And did they see you in time? I asked Sarah. She shook her head. They admitted me at 11:45 p.m. But when the billing department ran my card the next morning, they told me my policy had been terminated retroactively to 5 p.m. that previous day. Mr. Sterling had called the broker personally to expedite the cancellation. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline. Retroactively, I turned to Marcus. You cut off a pregnant woman's health insurance hours after firing her, knowing she was in distress? Marcus looked up, unbothered. It's standard procedure, Your Honor. When an employee leaves the premises, they are no longer my liability. Premiums are prorated. Why should the company pay for coverage on a non-employee? We run a lean operation. Every dollar counts. Every dollar counts, I repeated. You canceled her coverage to save what? A few $100s in prorated premiums? While you were mourning a $50,000 bonus? It's about discipline, Judge, Marcus said, crossing his legs. If you make exceptions for one, you have to make them for everyone. Besides, I offered her a severance package. I tried to be generous. She refused it. That's on her. Ah, the severance, I said, picking up a document Sarah's lawyer had submitted. I have the offer letter here. You offered her $500. It was a gesture of goodwill, Marcus said with a shrug. $500 is a lot of money for someone like her. $500, I read from the paper, in exchange for a full release of claims, a non-disclosure agreement, and a non-disparagement clause preventing her from discussing her termination or the working conditions at your company. You wanted to buy her silence, her rights, and her dignity for $500. It's a standard separation agreement, Marcus argued. My lawyers drafted it. It protects the brand. Reputation is everything in tech. If she goes around bad-mouthing us, it hurts recruitment. I was paying for brand safety. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw a man who believed that $500 was a fortune to a desperate person, and that his $50,000 bonus was a basic human right. The disconnect wasn't just economic. It was a fracture in his soul. Sarah, I asked, why didn't you sign it? You needed the money. Sarah looked up, and for the first time, there was fire in her eyes. Because my baby is not a secret, Judge. And because he told me, as he handed me the paper, he said, take this and buy some diapers, because nobody else is going to hire a slow horse. He called me a slow horse. I tore the paper up in my car. Marcus rolled his eyes. She's being dramatic. I used a metaphor. It's a competitive market. I slammed the file shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Mr. Sterling, you seem to like metaphors. You like racehorses. You like sprints. You like velocity. Well, let me give you a metaphor. You are standing on a train track, staring at your reflection in a mirror, admiring your suit, while a freight train called federal law is barreling down on you, and you are too busy counting your pennies to hear the whistle. Marcus frowned. Is that a threat, Your Honor? Because I will remind you, I have done nothing illegal. At will employment, KPIs, standard severance. You can lecture me all you want, but you can't touch me. I leaned back in my chair. A strange calm settled over me. It's the calm I always feel right before I deliver the storm. You think this is just a lecture? I asked softly. You think you are protected by the phrase at will? Mr. Sterling, have you ever heard of the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978? Have you ever heard of the Family and Medical Leave Act? Or did your best lawyers in the city forget to mention that federal statutes supersede your sprint goals? Marcus blinked. For the first time, his hand went to his tie, loosening it just slightly. Those don't apply to performance firings, he stammered, his voice losing a fraction of its silk. We shall see, I said. But first, I want to talk about that bonus again. That $50,000 sitting in your retained earnings. You said you didn't get it because you missed your target, but I'm curious, what would happen if the court determined that the target was missed due to an illegal act? Specifically, the illegal termination of a key support staff member? Marcus froze. He stared at me. The arrogance didn't vanish, but it cracked. He realized I wasn't just looking at the law. I was looking at his money. And for men like Marcus, that is the only place they can bleed. Data doesn't lie. That is what Marcus had told me earlier. He clung to his spreadsheets and his micrometrics like a religious text. He believed that if he could reduce a human being to a row of numbers, he could justify any cruelty. But there is one thing arrogant men often forget about data. It cuts both ways. I picked up the thick binder of evidence Marcus's legal team had so confidently submitted. Mr. Sterling, I said, flipping through the pages, since you are a man of numbers, let's look at the numbers. You claimed Miss Miller's 18% drop in velocity was the sole reason for her termination. You claimed this was a standard applied to everyone. Absolutely, Marcus said, regaining a bit of his posture. We hold everyone to the same bar, no exceptions. Is that so? I paused at a page I had bookmarked earlier. I'm looking at the logs for a Mr. Jason Reed. Who is he? Marcus frowned, confused by the detour. Jason? He's one of our senior developers. Brilliant coder. Why? According to your own tracking software, I read aloud. During the same month of October, Mr. Reed's idle time increased by 22%. His time away from the desk was actually higher than Miss Miller's. Yet, he wasn't fired. In fact, according to this payroll sheet, he received a spot bonus for creative problem solving. Can you explain that discrepancy? Marcus shifted in his seat. The silk tie suddenly looked a little tight. That's different. Jason takes long breaks to think. He's solving complex algorithms in his head. His idle time is productive idle time. Miss Miller is an admin. Her job is physical. If she isn't moving, she isn't working. So, I said, removing my glasses and looking at him with pure, unadulterated scrutiny. When a man stops moving to think, it is creative genius worthy of a bonus. But when a pregnant woman stops moving to breathe, it is dead weight worthy of termination. The gallery was so quiet you could hear the hum of the hard drives in the court reporter's machine. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. He realized he had just walked into a trap of his own making. That is the textbook definition of discrimination, Mr. Sterling, I continued. You didn't fire her for the data. You fired her for the pregnancy. You used the data to mask your bias. You saw a woman needing accommodation, and instead of following the law, you saw a broken tool, and you threw her away. It's not bias, Marcus snapped, losing his cool. It's about the optics. Do you know what it looks like to investors when they walk in and see someone waddling around, huffing and puffing? It looks like we are a charity, not a tech unicorn. It kills the vibe. It kills the momentum. There it was. The mask had completely fallen off. He wasn't talking about KPIs anymore. He was talking about optics. He was talking about his discomfort with the reality of a human body creating life. Sarah let out a small sob. I tried to hide it, she whispered. I wore baggy clothes. I tried to walk normally, even when my pelvis felt like it was splitting apart. I didn't want to ruin his vibe. I looked at Sarah, then back at Marcus. You worried about your momentum? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Mr. Sterling, you are about to hit a wall so hard your momentum will be the least of your concerns. You admitted on the record that her physical appearance and the optics of her pregnancy played a role in your decision. Do you know what you just did? Marcus looked around the room, finally sensing the gravity of his confession. He looked at his lawyer's empty chair, wishing someone would tell him to stop talking. You just confessed to a violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, I said, and you did it with arrogance. But I'm not done with your numbers yet. There is one more number I want to discuss. That $50,000. I turned to the court clerk. Please pull up the company's financial standing submitted in the discovery phase. I want to see exactly where that retained earnings pool is located. Marcus stood up halfway. You can't touch corporate assets. That money belongs to the shareholders. It's locked. Mr. Sterling, I said, picking up my gavel not to strike, but to hold it like a weapon, in a civil judgment involving malice and willful violation of federal rights, the court has broad discretion to award punitive damages. And I am looking at a man who values a vacation home deposit over the life of a newborn child. You wouldn't, Marcus whispered, his face draining of color. Try me, I said, but before I rule, I want to hear one thing. I want you to look at Miss Miller, not at me, at her and tell her why her baby's health was less important than your quarterly target. If you can do that, if you can look her in the eye and say it, I might believe this was just business. But if you can't, then we both know what this really is. The room waited. Marcus turned his head slowly towards Sarah. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, the kind that presses against your eardrums. Marcus turned his head. He looked at Sarah Miller. For a second, I thought I might see a flicker of humanity. I thought perhaps the sight of a woman 8 months pregnant, wiping tears from her face with a shredded tissue, might pierce the armor of his Italian suit. But I was wrong. Marcus looked at her, the way a driver looks at a pothole, an annoyance to be steered around. Sarah, Marcus said, his voice devoid of warmth. Look, I get it. It's hard. But you have to understand my position. The investors don't care about biology. They care about the quarterly report. If I miss that target, the stock price drops. If the stock drops, people lose jobs. I did what I had to do to protect the herd. You were just, unfortunately, the slowest member. The slowest member, Sarah repeated, her voice barely a whisper. She looked up at him, her eyes clear for the first time. My baby's name is Leo. That's who you called a slow member. That's who you cut off from the doctor. Leo. He isn't a statistic, Marcus. He's a person. Marcus flinched, not from guilt, but from the discomfort of having a name attached to his dead weight. He turned back to me, his face hardening. See, Judge? She's making it personal. Business isn't personal. It's math. You failed, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. I gave you a chance to show me you were a man who made a mistake. Instead, you showed me you are a machine that malfunctions whenever it encounters decency. I picked up my pen. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen, my one indulgence. I like the way it feels when I sign a judgment. It feels final. Mr. Sterling, I began, looking down at my notes. You keep talking about math, so let's do some math. You admitted to firing Miss Miller based on her pregnancy-related limitations. That establishes liability. There is no debate there. You broke the law. Now we are just negotiating the price of your arrogance. Marcus crossed his arms. My company has insurance for wrongful termination suits. They'll cut her a check for a few $1,000s. We can settle this and go home. Insurance covers negligence, I corrected him. Insurance covers accidents. Insurance rarely covers malice. And what you described, the optics, the vibe, the retroactive cancellation of health insurance while she was in the emergency room, that is not negligence, that is malice. That is willful intent to harm. Marcus's confidence wavered. What are you saying? I am saying that in cases of malice, the court is not limited to compensatory damages, I explained, leaning back. I don't just have to pay her back for the wages she lost. I have to punish you to ensure you never do this again. That is called punitive damages. And do you know how we calculate punitive damages? I didn't wait for an answer. We look at the defendant's assets. We look at what matters to them. We look for a number that hurts. I saw Marcus's eyes dart to the side. He was doing the calculation in his head. He was thinking about his bank account. You mentioned earlier that Miss Miller stole your $50,000 bonus, I said. You seemed very attached to that number. You had a vacation home picked out. You had plans. That money is gone, Marcus insisted quickly. The board withheld it. It's in the corporate account. Actually, I said, pulling a sheet of paper from the financial discovery pile, I'm looking at your contract. Clause 4.2 regarding executive compensation. It says that retained performance bonuses are held in escrow and can be released at the discretion of the CEO once the next quarter's targets are adjusted. In layman's terms, Mr. Sterling, that money isn't gone. It's just sitting in a waiting room, waiting for you. Marcus went pale. That's corporate property. You can't reach inside a corporation and grab executive pay. Watch me, I said. Because when a CEO uses his corporate power to violate civil rights, the corporate veil becomes very thin. And I have a very sharp pair of scissors. I looked at Sarah. Miss Miller, what was your annual salary? $32,000, Your Honor, she replied. 32,000, I repeated. Mr. Sterling, you were going to receive a bonus, just a bonus that was nearly double her entire yearly existence. And you fired her because she threatened that extra cash. I wrote a number on my legal pad. I circled it twice. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice dropping to that low, rumbling register that fills the entire room. You wanted that $50,000. You obsessed over it. You blamed a pregnant woman for losing it. Well, I have good news and bad news. The good news is I found the money. The bad news is you aren't going to buy a vacation home with it. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You can't do that. That's my money. I earned that. Sit down, I barked. The gavel didn't move, but my voice struck him harder than wood ever could. He sank back into his chair, stunned. I am not just going to award her lost wages, I declared. I am going to make sure that every time you look at your bank account for the next year, you remember the name Leo. The sound of my pen scratching against the paper was the only noise in the room. I could feel Marcus staring at my hand, watching the numbers form. He was a man who understood numbers, but he was about to see a calculation he never expected. Mr. Sterling, I said, putting the pen down, you treated this courtroom like a boardroom. You thought you could negotiate. You thought you could throw a few $1,000s at a problem and make it go away. But justice is not a business transaction. It is a correction. I picked up the judgment form. First, let's address the actual damages. You cut off Miss Miller's insurance retroactively, forcing her to incur emergency room bills during a medical crisis. The total bill submitted is $4,500. You are going to pay that every cent. Marcus nodded quickly, looking almost relieved. Fine, $4,000. Done. Can I go now? Sit down, I said, my voice sharp. I'm just getting started. Next, lost wages. You fired her 2 weeks before her due date. Under the Family and Medical Leave Act, had she remained employed, she would have been entitled to 12 weeks of leave. By firing her, you robbed her of that stability. I am awarding her 3 months of back pay, plus the value of the maternity leave. That totals $15,600. Marcus winced. 20 grand? That's steep for a low-level admin. It's not steep, I corrected him. It's the law. But now we get to the part that interests me the most. The punitive damages. I leaned forward. This was the moment where the power dynamic in the room would shift permanently. Punitive damages are designed to punish malicious behavior and deter future bad acts, I explained slowly. You admitted on the record that your motivation for firing her was to protect your $50,000 quarterly bonus. You valued that specific sum of money more than the safety of a mother and her unborn child. You made a choice. You chose the cash over the human. Marcus swallowed hard. He saw where I was going. Therefore, I declared, I find it fitting that the punishment should match the motivation. You wanted to save $50,000? Fine. But you weren't saving it for yourself. You were saving it for her. I looked him dead in the eye. I am ordering punitive damages in the amount of $50,000. And I am attaching a court order to the corporate funds currently held in escrow under your executive compensation clause. That bonus is no longer yours, Mr. Sterling. It belongs to Sarah Miller. The room exploded with gasps. Marcus shot out of his chair as if he had been electrocuted. You can't do that. That's my money. That's my property. I earned that bonus. You forfeited that bonus the moment you broke the law to get it. I roared back, my voice filling the hall. You do not get to keep the profits of discrimination. That money was blood money, Mr. Sterling, and I am washing it clean by giving it to the victim. I'll appeal, Marcus screamed, his face turning a shade of purple that matched his expensive tie. I'll bury this court in paperwork. My lawyers will destroy you. You can try, I said, my voice dropping back to that terrifying calm. But appeals take time, and court orders for garnishment are effective immediately. As of this moment, that escrow account is frozen, subject to this judgment. If you try to move a single dime, if you try to transfer it, hide it, or spend it, I will hold you in criminal contempt and I will put you in a cell where the only thing you can count is the bars on the window. Marcus stood there, his chest heaving. The arrogance was gone. In its place was the sheer, raw panic of a man who had just watched his prize dissolve into thin air. I turned to Sarah. She was stunned. Her hands were covering her mouth, and fresh tears were streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of fear. They were tears of disbelief. Sarah, I said softly, $70,100. That is the total judgment. It won't erase the stress he caused you. It won't undo the panic attack in the parking lot, but it will ensure that when Leo arrives next week, he comes into a world where his mother can afford to breathe. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. She looked at Marcus, not with fear anymore, but with pity. She saw him for what he was, a small man standing on a pile of money that was no longer high enough to hide him. Mr. Sterling, I said, picking up the gavel, you worried about velocity, you worried about speed. Well, I want you to appreciate the speed of this court, because it took you 4 months to ruin her life, and it took me 45 minutes to fix it. I raised the gavel. Marcus flinched. He actually flinched. The gavel hit the wood, and the sound rang out like a closing bell on a bad trade. For the first time all morning, Marcus Sterling stood absolutely still. There was no checking of the watch. There was no smoothing of the tie. There was just the hollow, sinking realization that he had walked in here a king and was walking out a debtor. Judgment is entered, I said, my voice final. Court is adjourned. Marcus looked at his lawyer's empty chair, then at me, then at the door. He picked up his briefcase. It looked heavy now, burdened by the weight of the reality he had tried to ignore. He didn't look at Sarah again. He couldn't. Shame is a powerful thing, even for the arrogant. He walked out of my courtroom not with the brisk, confident stride of a CEO racing against the clock, but with the slow, dragging steps of a man who knows he has lost something money cannot buy back. I watched him go, and I thought about that $50,000. To him, it was a deposit on a vacation home, a status symbol, a score in a game only he was playing. But to Sarah, it was safety. It was diapers. It was a pediatrician. It was the difference between fear and a future. Sarah stood up slowly. She placed a hand on her stomach, and a small, tired smile broke through the exhaustion on her face. She looked at me and mouthed the words, "Thank you." I nodded. I didn't smile back. Judges don't smile when the law has to be used as a weapon, but inside, I felt that rare, quiet satisfaction that comes when the scales finally balance. She walked out of the courtroom, and even though she was heavy with child and exhausted, she moved with a lightness I hadn't seen before. She wasn't a slow horse anymore. She was a mother who had fought for her young and won. As the room cleared, I looked down at the empty bench where Marcus had sat. He had talked so much about velocity. He had talked about moving fast, breaking things, and optimizing performance. He thought speed was the only metric that mattered, but he learned the hard way that justice has its own pace. It might be slow, it might take months of filing, waiting, and enduring, but when it arrives with the force of a freight train. Marcus Sterling wanted to save his bonus by firing a slow employee. Instead, he paid for her maternity leave, her medical bills, and her peace of mind with the very money he tried to hoard. He ran a sprint against decency, and he lost. In my courtroom, I don't care about your stock price. I don't care about your quarterly targets. I care about how you treat the people who help you build your empire, because at the end of the day, when the ledger is closed, the only profit that really matters is your integrity. And Marcus Sterling just went bankrupt. If you believe that workers deserve dignity and that no boss should ever be allowed to put a price tag on a human being's health, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below with the word justice if you think Marcus got exactly what he deserved. I'm Judge Boyd, and in this court, the truth always gets paid in full.